Until the 18th century, the trombone is commonly called the sackbut, which actually came from the French word secure, which meant to draw out a sword. And this is because of the action of lengthening the slide reminded people of the action of drawing out a sword from a scabbard. And then the term trombone in the 18th century comes from the Italian word tromba and one, which means trumpet and large. Trombones have been used in a variety of situations, including the courts of aristocrats, churches, and in military bands. However, beginning in the 18th century, the instrument was seldom used in secular music. Instead, it was used much more often in religious situations, such as in church. So trombones have a similar range to that of the human voice, which would produce like awe-inspiring harmonies during concerts. And so then they began to be treated as divine instruments. And it is a theory that composers refrain from using the trombones because then it would be sacrilegious. Right? And then Beethoven actually was the first one to use trombones in secular music in the Symphony Number 5 in C minor, and it was first played in 1808. And Beethoven would then go on to use the trombones again in Symphony Number 6, Symphony Number 9, and so on. And that pretty much built the foundation for the trombone to stand as a fixture in church, jazz ensembles, concert ensembles, and orchestras. All right. Do you want to switch slides for me? All right. So the next thing that we're going to go over is the buzz. All right. So the buzz, along with air support, is the most important fundamental technique for brass players. Buzzing is the action of vibrating the lips through a medium, which is normally a mouthpiece, and that allows the brass instrument to produce sound. For a trombonist, we have what's called BLT, which I coined from Dr. Clark, who coined it from someone else. So pretty much BLT is bite, lips, and tongue. So for the bite, a trombone player should have, their teeth should be no further in than like the width of the index finger, so like here. The corners of the lips should be firm, and the middle of the mouth should be soft, and then the tongue, which represents the oral cavity inside of the mouth, the back of the tongue should be low, the throat should feel wide, and then the soft palate should be raised. And the most common way that I know how to represent the sound is to say like "oh" in Minnesota, right? And then all of these steps represent what the ideal embouchure or the mouth position should be for the trombone. After having the good embouchure, we must be aware of air usage and consumption. Good air support comes from learning the amount of air and compression of said air you or the specific player needs to play a note, measure, or melodic phrase. Most of the time, what helps a lot of people to get a good buzz is that they have to then recognize what the sound or what the note sounds like before they play it. So for example, a concert B flat. You have to be able to hear it and then be able to buzz it. And all of that will help you. Another thing that I really love that helps me with the trombone is I'll take a paper clip, right? You bend it, put it in the mouthpiece, or where the mouthpiece is supposed to go. Then you put it here, and what happens is it's not going to create a very pretty sound, but you will create no sound unless you have the right embouchure and you're producing a correct buzz. So. Stuff like that. Like, it's ugly, but if you make no sound, then you're not doing it right. So developing oral skills can be as simple as hearing and singing the pitches on a repetitive basis to create familiarity and confidence. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is loud versus soft. So the modern day trombone is designed to be one of, if not the loudest instruments in an ensemble setting, and it can peak to be around 115 decibels on average. A lot of people say that this is because the trombone is more cylindrical, whereas most other brass instruments are conical, as well as the instrument having a broader and wider front-facing bill that helps the player, point the sound. With that being said, playing louder and softer can be challenging, especially to newer musicians. This is because oftentimes they'll equate, playing softer with less air and playing louder with a lot of air, which isn't necessarily the case. To play softer, you have to be using the same amount of air that you would to play it at mezzo forte or forte, but you just have to use it at a slower pace. Whereas playing stronger, or playing louder, you just use it at a faster pace. And then, that is what helps the horn resonate. And so now I'm going to play Movement 1 Largo from Sonata in F by Benedetto Marchi. Because the timbre of the trombones was so well received for its lifelike sound, trombones started coming in different categories, from piccolo, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, contrabass, and with those, it changes the location of the ranges, but generally all trombones have that vast of a range. Professional trombonists are even known to stretch the limits of the trombone from its normal limitations. To be able to reach all of those notes in a trombone's range, the player must develop the ability to fluctuate their embouchure. For instance, when playing in a higher register of the instrument, the lips are firmer, the air is more pointed downward, and the compression is based on different multiples depending on how high the note is. A common mistake with many younger players is that they usually will push the mouthpiece really far on the mouth to try and squeeze the note out, but in doing so they were restricting the airflow and hindering their ability to play for longer periods of time. With that being said, the mouthpiece should be comfortably surrounding the middle of the mouth, and when learning to play higher, it is crucial to remind the players that playing high should come from pressure in the abdomen and not directly from the mouth. So in playing low notes, the player will relax the embouchure, and generally the jaw will start to open. And playing low notes can sometimes prove to be more difficult than playing high, because when learning the basic range of the instrument in their first couple of years, they are told to stay firm, to stay firm, to stay firm. and so that makes it difficult for them to understand the concept of being able to open the jaw to get lower. And to show you high and low, I'm going to be playing Largo e Staccato from Sonata 1 by Galliard. So the next thing we're going to be going over is the harmonic series. So the trombone is the only brass instrument that really does, or that doesn't use valves to change the pitch within a harmonic series of notes, unless it's the valve trombone, which they don't use very much anymore, so irrelevant. The harmonic series is a built-in system of notes for a brass player, meaning that we can play an array of many different notes on a singular fingering or slide position. This concept is usually taught and understood when doing slurs, and then slurring is the action of moving the mouth and air in certain ways to reach the different notes within a specified fingering. Learning to control the air and embouchure to fit those pockets of tones is very crucial for a beginning player. This also opened up a whole entire world for trombones because there are alternate fingerings for slide positions for the same notes, such as the standard F concert being played in first position and also being able to play it in sixth position, and then if you have a trigger, trigger 1. So. And the reason why this is so important is because it makes it easier for the instrumentalist to be able to do runs and everything and be able to play one note in multiple different locations. All right, and then the technique of utilizing the harmonic series on a trombone is the same as playing higher and lower. Using slur exercises helps a player develop a stronger embouchure and sonority over the horn. This exercise also helps develop control because when slurring, the player must try and make the transitions from note to note seem almost seamless. So I'm going to be playing a 5-note slur pattern. And then that would go on all the way down to 7th position. So the next thing I'm going to be talking about is articulated versus slurred. Both of these styles of playing are very important to the way the instrument conveys a story or message. Articulated notes are those that are generally played shorter with a lot more bounce, and they just have more space in between them. Articulated notes are generally for dramatic or rhythmic effect. For a player to play clean articulated notes, he or she must have an understanding of the position of the tongue when playing high and low, which are different, and understand what attack style they use. Attack styles for articulated notes range from dit, dot, tit, tot, and so on, as long as the sound is short, generally, so that way the student understands. When playing in the upper register of the instrument, the player will likely need to start the note with the tip of the tongue, which would be the tip of the tongue behind the front teeth, and while playing in the lower register, the tongue starts the note playing in the upper register, playing with the tip of the tongue behind the front teeth, and playing in the lower register, the tongue starts the note almost in between the teeth. All right, so for slurred melodic lines or phrases, the player should be using a la or da attack style. The tongue placement is similar, but instead of using the tip of the tongue, the instrumentalist should use the wider part of the tongue, and it generally sits back a little bit from the teeth and rests on the roof of the mouth. So now I will play Theme and Variation 1 from Annie Laurie by Arthur Schneider. So the next thing I want to talk about is fast versus slow. As many of you know, the trombone is essentially just a giant tuning slide. So the positions of the notes are very important, and they can differ depending on what register you're in or who's behind the mouthpiece, and if your tuning slide is in the right position. Therefore, it's an exact science. An example of this is that with my F attachment, all right, I can play technically the low C that's usually in sixth and trigger first by definition, but I usually have to bring it out some in order to make the note be in tune. So then I have to remember that whenever I need to play the low C and I decide to play it in first position, it actually needs to be 1.5. It's important for me to note this because when playing fast phrases, it can become difficult for an amateur player to be able to confidently and correctly perform the runs required of them. Sometimes the player is unable to move the slide fast enough to hit the correct note, and instead will play a semitone above or below it. The only really true way to fix this is to take it at a comfortable, slow pace and repeat the trebled run until the player becomes comfortable with the way it lands on the horn, and then generally working it back up to tempo. Playing slowly also has its problem. Because of the shape of the horn, if the performer cannot move the slide fast enough to reach the correct note, the player could produce what's known as a smear, which would be like instead of going and sometimes you don't want that, and that's pretty much called a smear. So smears tend to muddy up performances and can affect the overall tonality of the ensemble or piece. The best way to avoid this problem would be ensure younger or newer players that they are regularly cleaning their instruments as to reduce the gunk within the tubing, as well as lessening the restriction on the horn, making it easier to glide between notes. So now I'll be playing the intro and trio from the Gaiety Polka by Architect. I already did that. I played the wrong tune.
No.
I played on Annie Laurie. Oh, Gaiety Polka by Barry Hartley. Yeah, okay. It's just wrong on my notes. So the next thing I want to talk about are glissandos. So the glissando or the gliss is one of the most recognizable features of the trombone. The glissando is best described as a series of notes played along the slide of the trombone without interruption, usually with a point A and a point B in mind. What makes it different from a smear is the articulation. Generally, the player will start the note on a nice tone and then bend it up to the desired second pitch, whereas a smear is unintentional. This is found most commonly in classical literature and jazz, but can appear in different situations as well. Glisses are also limited because of the partial of the instrument within the 7 slide positions. So if the start and end notes are in 2 different partials, it will break in a gliss, and therefore it ruins the moment. So the first deliberate use in performance is fairly recent in the long history of the trombone, and its acceptance is a legitimate technique. The acceptance as a legitimate technique came somewhat later. Early orchestral uses include The Sea by Glazunov, pieces by Schoenberg, and in 1900, Sousa's band performed lots of ragtime pieces with heavy use of glissandos at the Paris Exposition. And then I'll be playing the Arioso by Walter S. Hartley. thing I will be talking about is flutter tonguing. So flutter tonguing is a technique in which performers flutter their tongue to make a characteristic sound. It most recently became popular in recent years due to some videos of guys on mopeds with like the guy on the back with the trombone, and he's trying to make like engine sounds. It is not commonly found in concert repertoire now, but in the 20th century compositions, notably occurring in the music of Schoenberg and Shostakovich, they used them a lot. But when it does appear, it is often marked in German as Flatterzonge, that was more French, but whatever, or as FLT or FTZ. It is also marked as a frullato in Italian. The traditional method for producing a flutter tongue effect is to roll the tip of the tongue as rapidly as possible, or like rolling your R's. This is done by performing an isolated alveolar trill while playing the notes you desire. Some players find it difficult or even impossible to roll their tongues this way. So then we have what's called uvular flutter tonguing, which is a really weird concept that I learned while doing this. It's pretty much creating the same effect, but using the uvula in the back of the mouth. Right? It's actually really common with flutes. Flutes do actually do it a lot because they find it harder to roll their R's while pointing their air down. It's really interesting. It produces the traditional growl sound from the jazz idiom. And then flutter tonguing can also be used in conjunction with other types of articulation. So I'll do the engine noises for you, pretty much. You ready? Yes. It's probably the only time you hear me do it. Okay. Multiphonics is something I aspire to be able to do, but I sadly cannot. But I can tell you about it and show you. So it's definitely one of the more interesting techniques that some trombones can master. This is the art of being able to hum or sing while also being able to play a note. And then that creates chords. The trombonist Albert Mangelsdorff was an excellent multiphonic master and performed many live performances showcasing his unique ability to experiment with the horn. When reading an article by Jen Baker called The Multiphonics Cheat Sheet, she mentions that even when done properly, sung multiphonics can lead to vocal strain due to its extremely unorthodox vocal technique. It is indeed necessary to sing near one's top volume most of the time. Additionally, wave patterns in the voice and the trombone creates interference patterns and that bounce back between the vocal cords and the mouthpiece. So pretty much like, even though it's really cool and everything, you still need to be extremely cautious whenever you are learning to do this. And then to show you, I have a video of James Morrison, and it's titled, "You Can't Play Two Notes at the Same Time." So pretty much I've been watching that video on repeat, trying to figure out how he's doing it. So the next thing I'm going to be talking about are mutes. So mutes are very popular in a lot of jazz compositions because it puts a twist on the timbre and the overall color of the trombone. There are a variety of different types of mutes and how they affect the phrases and pieces overall. Today I'll be demonstrating the straight, cup, bucket, plunger, soft tone, and heron mute. So a straight mute is, or I'm sorry, I should probably demonstrate what it sounds like before the mute. So this is an outro that anyone in the jazz band would be able to recognize very well. So it's the outro to Vehicle by James Peterick. With the small open end going inside of the bell of the brass instrument and the larger closed end on the outside. This mute is held in place by 3 pieces of cork, and the mute produces a kind of stuffy sound when it's made from cardboard, which is also known as the stone-lined mute, and a more piercing, brighter sound when made out of aluminum like this one here. The cup mute. The cup mute is pretty much the same thing as a straight mute, but with a cup at the end. It's crazy, right? The rounded edges around the lip of the cup allow air to escape out of the bell. And this cardboard nowadays is mostly made from aluminum, but it used to be made from cardboard. And a cup mute produces a softer, more muffled sound than the straight mute. Plunger mute. So the plunger mute is most often a regular bathroom plunger, a new one, don't use a used one. I can't vouch for that one. So in the days of the big band, a plunger mute was often made of cardboard and painted white and red. This is probably because it looked better than using a bathroom plunger, especially in a fancy ballroom setting. When reading jazz charts that call for a plunger mute, often you'll get a plus sign or an O. The plus sign representing you need to have it almost fully covering the bell, and then the O being slightly uncovered. Yeah. So this one I'm not going to do the vehicle thing because it's difficult. Talking about is the bucket mute. The bucket mute is usually made, or it used to be made primarily from like cardboard, and the clips would go on the outside of the bell, which they ended up changing because if you were in the middle of a piece where one was like, okay, use a mute, and then like the next 4 measures you had to not have the mute, it was very difficult to get that off the trombone. So now we pretty much have the aluminum one, which has holes in it, and then it also has fabric on the inside to help further muffle the sound, but because of the holes, it shows more of the natural timbre of the trombone. So then the next one is the soft tone mute, which is made out of fabric and is designed to envelop around the bell. This mute gives a distinct, richer, and darker sound, in my opinion. And I also find it to be a lot of fun to use because they say, like, you have to fill it up before you can use it, which the filling up part I always found really fun. So, like I said, you have to fill it up. All right. And it's caught on me. All right, and then the last one that we're going to be doing is the Harmon mute. The Harmon mute is almost exclusively made from aluminum, which is great. I say it when I give up on it. This mute has two parts. So there is the larger part that is bell-shaped and is held inside the instrument by one continuous cork around the opening of the mute. And then the second piece is called a stem, and it fits inside of the first one. This mute can be played with the stem all the way inside or part way inside or left out altogether. When reading jazz charts that call for a Harmon mute, the printed chart will usually indicate how the stem is to be used as well. The Harmon mute is also known as the wah-wah mute, and pretty much you'll see why. And I believe it was this mute that they did the Charlie Brown adult voices.
It was actually the flunger was a pixie, which is
What does this one sound like?
It does sound like Charlie Brown.
So next I'm going to be playing a duet with Jonathan Baker, known as a trumpet march. The trumpet march is by an anonymous composer during the 18th century. If you remember what I said in the beginning, in the 18th century, trombones were only supposed to be used for religious practice. And because of that, a lot of the composers who actually wrote songs during this time didn't want to take responsibility in fear of dying, I guess. trombone is a versatile instrument, and it's used in many different settings and many different ways and standards throughout time. So, before I play my final piece, I would like to thank some very important people in my life. I would like to thank Dr. Lanning for being a great person to talk to when times became rough and difficult, and for pushing me to continue on with my journey, as well as letting me use this rehearsal hall for my recital. Dr. Mack, thank you for always being there when I needed you to help me in class, as well as doing some heavy lifting to make sure I graduate on time. Dr. Kim, thank you for showing me how to persevere through obstacles and building me to be a strong person. Mr. Castro, if he's here, Mr. Castro, thank you for always putting a smile on my face when I was down and providing comedic relief through the years, all the time. Dr. Clark, thank you for consistently getting words like relentless and compression in my head. You were always there to push me to be a great musician while also teaching me how to be a great teacher. Mr. Baker, thank you for not giving up on me and for motivating me to be the best player I could be, and for not letting me skip my warm-ups, ever. Thank you to all my family and friends for your constant support and love. These 4 years have proved to be a great challenge, as many of you know, but you guys have made sure that I never backed off on my goals and provided comfort in my times of need. And then thank you to all of you for coming here to listen to my lecture and support me, even when it's not required of you. I know it's a Friday. No one has school on Fridays unless you go to high school or a different college. But I hope everyone has at least learned one new thing about the trombone, or understands why the instrument is so important to so many people. So I want you to enjoy this last piece and have a wonderful night. So the last piece that I'm going to be playing is called To a Wild Rose by Edward MacDowell. This song is probably the most important piece to me so far in my 4 years being here. This is because while I was learning this song, a very special person to me had passed away, and then I dedicated the song to him. And he always made it very clear to support my goals as a musician. And so, To a Wild Rose.